Welcome to Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp 2020. It's day 4. Unfortunately, it's our last day. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this interview segment is Chris Wysopal. He is co-founder, chief technology officer, and I think chief information security officer at Veracode. Chris, welcome to Security Weekly.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
We were reminiscing slightly before this. I think the last time you and I had a chance to sit down and talk was at Gartner Security and Risk in 2016 when we could actually meet again. And I asked you an interesting question around containers back then. We were doing a lot of research at Tenable at the time, and you guys have made a lot of progress since. Let's kind of walk through some of the trends in the way applications are being built, and then how do we have to think about securing these new kind of modern applications?
Yeah, so the biggest change is, the cloud native technology, right? So, Docker virtual machines wasn't necessarily cloud native. It came before the cloud, but it helped build the infrastructure for the cloud. You can obviously use containers separate from the cloud, but people are building applications in the cloud using containers, and now they're using functions as a service like Lambda and Azure Functions. And so the real change we're seeing in application security is these cloud native applications where these different technologies are being used, and it's just changing the nature of what an application is. You got code distributed over all these different places, and they're all linked together with APIs. So just things are getting more distributed, APIs are getting more important, being able to understand the risk of code running in a container versus a VM versus in function as a service. It's making it more complicated, frankly.
Yeah, and it's not only the application code now. We're spinning up infrastructure as code, right? I mean, if you think about in a cloud environment, you're using Terraform or CloudFormation templates or something to spin up these services and all these different infrastructure components, and that's code. I mean, there's potential, maybe misconfigurations, maybe not a true vulnerability, depending on how your definition of vulnerability. But I mean, we're seeing not just a change in the way applications are being built and coded, but also the way we're deploying them is through a lot of infrastructure as code as well.
Absolutely. And it's both a challenge and an opportunity, right? The challenge is, hey, we need to understand what's going on in those Terraform scripts, right? We need to understand that because that's where the information is that's then getting deployed, and people aren't logging into those machines and administering production anymore. They're making changes in their IAC and then re-pushing. So you have, and a lot of times people aren't even logging into those machines, right? They're making immutable. There's no way to log into them. You need to understand it pre-production. So that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It means we can understand better what we're putting into production without having to install agents in all those machines and constantly scan all those machines. So there's a chance to find problems before you push them into production with things like your configuration, where you might have been using a security tool to scan your network and hosts to find those exact same problems. So that's where I think of it as an opportunity. But there's a whole nother angle of it that's an opportunity is a lot of the things you used to do in production are being done as code, which means that we can use all those ways we manage code, which is ungodly complex, right? Developers have come up with all these ways of doing revision control and writing unit tests and trying to figure out what's wrong before it goes into production. Now all those things that are more configuration and versions of software and versions of APIs that maybe you could have only found out in production before, we can start to do those at coding time. So there's this whole movement called everything as code, where you're just checking everything in, your policies, your configurations. And I think it has a way of potentially making security better, even as complexity increases.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the challenge we have, though, is integrating all those tests and checks, part of that CI/CD pipeline, right? Is as you're moving down the pipeline, efficiently checking and validating the configurations, the code, and all those things now. It's a great opportunity. But as I look at the security industry as a whole, how well are we integrating our security solutions into the developer tools and the developer pipeline to really make it efficient and effective to do those checks all pre-production, so that when the code gets into production, I don't have to worry about my RASP or my DAST or some of those other things. I still probably want to do it, but I can do a lot more by shifting left, to use a common term, right? But it's also making sure that we integrate our tooling into that developer pipeline.
No, absolutely. And you're kind of bringing up some of the points that we asked in a survey we recently did. We did this ESG survey about some of the challenges that development teams are having around securing their apps. And 43% said DevOps integration is a challenge. We're changing the way people are building applications. Scanning things in production has been going on for decades, right? There's lots of tools and techniques to do that. People in the networking team, people in the production teams are all used to these things going on. Now we're having developers change the way they're doing things, inserting things into their process at different stages along the way, looking at repos, looking in the IDE, looking in the CI/CD pipeline, failing the build on different security properties. This is disruptive at first, right? Change is hard, and everyone wants to keep building code fast. So it's going to take some time. But it's what a lot of our customers are struggling with. And, we've taken an approach that, we used to make our tools and our outputs consumable by the security team. Mm-hmm. And today it's 100% focused on having it consumed by the development team. We're seeing the shift where it used to be the security team made AppSec decisions and actually, ran the testing, to where we kind of as now, where it's kind of joint between the AppSec team and the development team, making decisions on, what's the policy, should we push this vulnerability into production? But we're seeing the trend be, it's going to be all the development team is going to be doing all the testing, making all the decisions, and that's a many-year process that we're in the middle of changing. But the vision of what development will be 5 years from now is definitely going to be different than it is now.
Yeah, I think the days of a dedicated separate AppSec team, they're numbered, right? Because you've really got to bring that security component into the development and the DevOps teams. That's the concept of DevSecOps. But it does require integration of results and findings into tools that developers use, not the tools that security folks use. And I think we're still going through that transition of people really understanding that, okay, I found some great results, but which developer is going to pick up that report, that paper report, or log into a security tool to get those? So we have to be very cognizant of those results. That data has to get back into their IDEs, their Jira ticketing systems, their Slack channels, whatever those tools are that the DevOps team's using.
Oh, absolutely. So the information has to get to the right place in the format that it's there's been many years of optimizing how developers fix bugs, right? And how that whole process works to be efficient, figuring out, do you need to fix the bug? Who needs to fix the bug? And figuring out how can we get that bug detected and fixed earlier in the process to make writing quality, reliable, and efficient code not slow down the team. And so security has to learn from that, and we have to adopt those processes. And so that's why we're building our tools so they just plug into all those places you talk about. And the whole shifting left is also, the developer who ends up writing a piece of insecure code needs to be the one that's fixing that piece of code. There shouldn't be like a separate security fix team, because then that developer never learns, right? And it just takes longer. It's going to cost more. So it's sort of getting the problem as close to the person who created the problem is sort of the mentality that goes into it. And that changes the way you think about application security. It's no longer what's the risk of this entire application to the business, the way security people think about it. It's looking at the small microscopic lines of code level, is like, detecting a weakness and just fixing that weakness at the point it's created. And you never get to the point of the risk being even have to be managed later by the security team. And it is kind of the dream of AppSec people that the things are working this way, but it's now become a requirement because of DevSecOps. We just can't do it any other way. Other ways are too slow.
Yeah, and I think it also changes the way we measure success in an AppSec program. And the metrics change. I was talking to Sandy Carielli from Forrester yesterday on champions. And I'm like, how do you measure success of a champions program? I'd ask you the same thing. How do we now have to think about measuring success of your application security program? Because we have things like velocity on the developer side, right? They want to push code faster, more frequently. They don't want that friction. But I also have to figure out how to measure things like we're used to, like vulnerabilities and bugs and that kind of stuff. How do you balance these new measurements for AppSec?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to measure it. One is, does adding AppSec processes and finding and fixing security bugs in your code actually slow you down, right? You want it to be slowing you down as small as possible, right? So a metric of success is my feature velocity slowed down with the same number of resources. Another measure of success is how often am I pushing a known vulnerability into production because I found it too late, it's going to take too long to fix, I had other priorities, I'm pushing that into production, right? And we found in our most recent survey that 48% of teams know that they are pushing known vulnerabilities into production. They're just prioritizing time to market over security, right? Wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to do that? We found those things earlier in the process. They were quicker and easier to fix, so we didn't need to do it. So those are the two ways I'm looking at it is, are you slowing things down? And what risk are you pushing into production? Yeah,
and it's balancing those two, I think, is the most critical part. Is developers, they're incented differently than the security team. So you have to balance that, that volume and frequency side with the risk side. And as long as you can come up with a good balance and you don't slow things down too well, the net benefit is we get better, more secure code in production, and I think that's a win for everybody.
No, absolutely. One of the other data points we found when we did our survey was 60% of respondents, and this is both security teams and engineering teams, said that 60% said that they had an app at their organization that had an OWASP 10 vulnerability exploited. So, the attackers are still out there. There's still vulnerabilities being pushed into production. So that's a metric that, is something that the security team can look at, right? Because it doesn't take time to market into consideration. But I think that's something that we obviously want to reduce that over time too.
Yes, definitely. Now, the survey results come out on August 11th, I think, the ISG report?
Yes. It comes out on August 11th. So this is just I'm just sort of teasing with some stats there. We're putting the final touches on the documentation and the report.
That's great. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
It's great to talk to you again. Great to catch up. And let's not let 4 years go by again.
Yeah, let's not. If anybody wants to download that ESG report on August 11th, please visit veracode.com. And with that, we'll take a short break and come back soon with more interviews on Virtual Hacker Summer Camp.